What we're going to kind of focus on today is just kind of a welcome to mastering and what the heck are all these assignments for. And I'm going to sort of address it as if you have never touched mastering at all and you're trying to figure out sort of how to sell this thing. So we are recording. I'm going to go ahead and wake up the
Yeah,
Zoom.
I'm just gonna mute myself because my cat is meowing a lot.
Yeah, no problem at all. That's perfectly fine. It's just you and I, so go feel free to mute. And if you have a question, feel free also to pop in and let me know. I'm going to move my controls off to the side so they're not caught in my on computer capture. Every once in a while, that will end up causing me to be muted. So if for some reason you all of a sudden don't hear me, please just kind of come back off mute and let me know that you can't hear me. So until then, I'm just going to go ahead and dive in and start addressing this. We're going to log into mastering and create a course kind of from nothing, as if we were just getting going. I have a lot hiding here, so I'm going to kind of minimize this. By the way, this is a neat little trick. You can create categories and hide if you start to have a lot. And as a rep or a customer service person, sometimes this area can get a little bit busy. If I was to unmask all this, it would be just kind of crazy. I've got, let's see, 14 sandboxes hanging out here. There's a bunch of those. And you can see if you didn't have these organized a little bit, it could get a little bit wonky. But that's kind of outside the scope of this. We're going to dive in and build a new course. And we'll pick, let's just say, Ammerman, because we can. That will wake up and get us something built here. We're actually not going to work in this one. I'm going to take this over and work in something I've got built already, just so you can see some fun stuff without having to wait on a build to happen. But this is going to search for that particular author. It'll take it a minute to find. It'll give me all the editions. There should only be 2 with this author, so no surprise there. And it looks like there's the first edition. I want to go ahead and build for the second edition. So I'll click that. And a key point here is you can either do this as a student use course, which of course is what most instructors are going to want to do. I often, if I'm building for an instructor, will build an instructor use course, which is not going to let any students in, but these are great for, say, a department to build to share. So if you've got somebody on a campus who's going to be a course coordinator, they may want to do an instructor use course to share with all of their colleagues. So we'll call this one sample build instructor, call it whatever the heck you want. And then if you want to let other instructors copy that, then do that right there. And we're going to get a tap on the shoulder whenever this is available. This is probably not news to you, but as long as this thing still looks gray, I can't touch it. So with that said, what I'm going to do is come down here and go into one of my sandbox courses for us to actually go do a little playing in. So we'll come down here. I'm fairly sure I've got a Ammerman sandbox. We'll pop that open and have a discussion. I think mostly what we're going to focus on today is what kind of assignments are there and why might you use those different assignments in different places. So as this wakes up, we're of course on the course homepage, and there's a lot going on this page. One thing that I often like to do for new instructors is once they get used to this getting started area where there's some great stuff, they get all the information they need to get settled in and get their course running. I let them know this actually does take up a whole lot of real estate, so it's handy to just sort of dismiss this and put it away. It's going to warn you that when you put this away, you can still get it, and I'll show you where in a second, but I'm going to click got it and it'll go away. Should I ever need that back, it's down here at the bottom under getting started, so just tap that and boom, it's right back. Put it away because it's in my way, got it, and we're out of there. I'm getting a warning that my internet connection is unstable. I'm hoping that you're still hearing me okay. And
You dropped out for just a second when you pointed out where the course getting started
okay.
went.
I'm not sure. I've got a really fast network. I'm not sure why it would be doing that. Let's kind of plug forward and see what we can do. One thing I can do is I can actually turn this personal VPN off, and that might speed this up a bit. I'm sitting at home, so there's no reason to worry about my network. It should be perfectly safe. Anyway, what I was going to here is what in the world are some of these assignments and why are they usable from the point of view of a guy who teaches with this stuff. Was that a question?
Oh, yeah, you dropped out again, but maybe it's just because it was updating. I don't know.
Very possible. Hang on, let me take a look at my network and see what's going on here. I'm going to look at my phone and see if I'm getting a problem reported on my own network. Hang tight. It's actually showing to have a really robust connection, but we'll play. Let me know if it breaks again. This is actually being recorded live on my computer, so there should be no network issues on the recording itself. So you're going to get a link a bit later on once Stephanie processes this, so you'll be able to see the whole show and get any glitches that you might have missed. But again, just shout if we have any more leaks. Anyway, assignment types. Of course, you know you've got this button over here to create an assignment, and as I click that, one thing that I often point out, and I'll certainly bring it up to you, I'll tell the instructors as I'm doing this, that actually is sort of clicking a link on our server, and it takes a while for that to respond. So if you click that and nothing happens right away, just sort of be patient because it will, all but guaranteed. Even I get frustrated and sometimes tap it again a second time around, but it'll come in. Now, what I often like to do, and I'll bring this idea up here, is I like to deal with several scenarios. So let me bring over a little mind mapping strategy. And the first idea is that whenever we're dealing with any course layout, in fact, let me rename that chapter. I like to have assignments that I'm going to have my students do pre-lecture. I like to have my students have assignments that they're going to do mid-lecture. And I like to have assignments for my students to do once the chapter is complete. And the logic here is most chapters in any given textbook are multi-day affairs. So if that's the case, if I'm going to cover, say, chapter 3, and I'm starting on Monday, I like my students prepared. So on the day before, I'll generally have them do my very favorite pre-lecture assignment, and that's dynamic study modules. So DSMs for me are ideal pre-lecture fare, and I'll show you why. For mid-lecture, say if I'm lecturing on this chapter on Monday and Wednesday, then what I'll have them do is some tough topics from the item library. And I'll show you how to find those. And then post-lecture, there are some really nice, in almost every textbook, some really nice pre-done publisher quizzes. So that's kind of my general layout, with the thought, again, that most chapters are going to cover more than one day. We've got some pre-lecture stuff, some mid-lecture stuff, and some post-lecture stuff, and I'll dive in and kind of show you those now. Now that I clicked on that create assignment, we've got these options. Create a new assignment, which is literally picking stuff from the item library. It's not actually writing questions, although that can be done. Then we have add assignments from my courses, add pre-built assignment from publishers. That's where I'm going to get those end of chapter quizzes, by the way, and then add dynamic study modules. This happens to be an A&P course, so I'm going to pop this open, and A&P is usually done in 2 semesters. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click from the drop down all, so it'll show me all the chapters. Then I can just go in here and pick, because I know which chapters I'm likely to be covering. So if this is my own personal A&P class, which I still teach live, by the way, we have chapter 1, which I cover. I don't cover chapters 2 and 3 in this course, so I wouldn't assign those, but I cover chapter 4 all the way through 12. So I'm going to kind of come in and tag these, and we'll just add in all of these dynamic study modules. And I might end up creating a sandbox that's got things that I already had in it. These won't reassign. It'll tell me they're already assigned. So I'm going to hit continue on that, and we'll have those DSMs. Now, I will ask you, and I know you're muted, have you seen dynamic study modules themselves presented before? Because I'd kind of like to show you my take on them if you haven't.
I've seen a few of them, yeah.
Okay, so you're kind of familiar with how they work and how they do what they do?
Yeah,
Cool.
I am. But hearing your opinion would be great too.
You know what? Actually, let's do that because the story I tell on these, everybody who hears it loves the way I'm describing them. And I've often encouraged people, please share because this is a good description. When we open up DSMs, and I'm just going to come into chapter 10 because it's right there near the top. I'm going to open up the student view, and here's my favorite story on these. You probably know that DSMs are actually a partnership between us and a company called Amplifier. And I often describe Amplifier as a 3-member team. And if you want, this will be on the video so you don't have to scratch down any notes. But I don't know if this is 3 individuals or if these are 3 teams, but I think of them in my head at least as 3 individuals. There's a learning specialist, and because we have a learning tool here, go figure, there's a learning specialist on the team. Another specialist on the team makes a lot of sense, and it'll make even more sense when you see some features. There's a neuroscientist on the team. That's near and dear to my heart because I actually am a neuroscientist myself. The 3rd member on the team is a gaming specialist, and that gaming specialist influence is absolutely seen as we do this. So as we wake this up and I start demoing this to an instructor for the first time, I say this kind of looks like a basic multiple choice question, and all of the dynamic study modules are in that format, but they're not exactly multiple choice. The best way to think of this is sort of how we all learned whenever we really started focusing on how to handle tests, how to handle multiple choice questions. Find a few that you know you can just eliminate and narrow down your answer to 1 or 2 best choices. And with that in mind, this interface gives you 2 votes per question. And if you're really, really certain about an answer, we even have a little pop-up tutorial. The very first time you're going to see this pop-up tutorial, and it's telling the student, if you're unsure, click it once. If you're certain, click it twice. That's going to fill in the circle. And I think you probably know that, Katie, but that's what's going to happen here. So if we clicked it, it says I'm unsure. If I want to cement in my answer and say I'm dead certain, I'm going to click that a second time. On the other hand, if I think it is maybe that one or that one, I can split the difference. So there's the logic there. I'm going to hit submit, and we're going to be told one of these is correct. Now, Katie, if you're the student, kind of put yourself in that mindset of you're this naive person who's never seen this, and you got this response. I think it's one of these 2, and it said you're unsure, and one of these is correct. Tell me, just out of curiosity, what is your initial gut instinct? What do you want to know right this second?
If there's a hint or is the ebook somewhere?
That's not a bad guess. My thought would be, okay, if you're telling me I'm unsure and one of these is right, I'm kind of going to want to know, okay, one of these is right, which one? You tell me I'm right, but which one is it? And this is the influence of actually 2 of those team members I was talking about. Your hint thing is a great one, and we'll come back to that in a second. But we're seeing the influence of the neuroscientist here, and we're also seeing the influence of the gaming specialist. This kind of a pat on the back, you got one right, is like the gaming specialist programming a video game and having the dings and dongs and the lights popping up, giving you a positive feedback reward. From the neuroscientist side of this, this actually gets into some serious learning. We just poked the dopamine reward system in that student's brain by saying you did something good, you got one right. So we have some kind of multi-layered reinforcement going on here. If we look at the next question, I'm not even going to look at this. I'm just going to pick an answer, and I'm wrong. Deep extension circle tunnel-like. That looks like T-tubules. And again, this is, that same thing I mentioned, the gaming specialist and the neuroscientist. We got a serious pat on the back here. We were certain, and this is the right answer. I'm going to put a couple of answers here in a hurry. I accidentally stumbled on the right answer there. You may know already, we're not going to see any more than 8 questions, and then we'll see the explanations. The reason for the 8, very much the neuroscientist influence here. Anybody who's ever taught anything about the human nervous system and A&P people will really resonate with this, but you can tell anybody this. When we study human learning and memory, especially memory, it comes in several forms. There's long-term memory, and that's certainly where all the instructors are striving to get their students into long-term memory, with the stuff we're teaching them. But there's also short-term and working memory. And you can think of working memory, short-term, as sort of like buckets. I can give you a list of 3 things or 5 things or 10 things to remember. We have at least traditionally understood that in short-term memory, humans have got about 7 or 8 bins, or you can think of memory buckets. So if I give you a list of 3 things to remember in the short term, you can do it. If I give you a list of 5 things, you can probably do that. If I give you a list of 12 things, unless you do some clever memory chunking tricks, you're not going to remember a list of 12 things. Therefore, we're not seeing explanations here. We'll see 8 questions, no more than that, sometimes a little less, and then an explanation. And that's very much the influence of the neuroscientist on the team here. So I screwed up on that one. I'm going to hit next question and pick I don't know. By the way, if they're clicking I don't know, that's going to eat up 2 votes. You can't say I don't know, but it might be this one. So I don't know is going to use both votes. Then, of course, once we get done with this, and we get that first set of questions done, then you're going to see the Let's Go Learn, and that's where we start seeing these textbook-specific bits of text and images or explanations. It's going to very much depend on the textbook you're selling and the particular author, but the text here is actually from the textbook itself and the images from the textbook as well. Sometimes you'll get text only, sometimes you'll get text plus an image. It depends on the actual question. But the thing I like about this is this bit of text might be on page 237 and the figure might be on page 241. And it's condensed that bit of the book right there in the moment where the student needs it. Even better, all this is done on the server. So if a student is doing like you and I are doing now, working on a laptop or computer back at home, and then they hop on, say, the bus to drive to school, they can break out their phone and it'll pick up right where they left off. So that's the story. That's how I tend to tell this. These, for me, are the ideal way, as I said, to do a pre-lecture study, that dynamic study module business. Get back over here, I wasn't done with you. Dynamic study modules make an outstanding pre-lecture thing. It absolutely lets the instructor know that the students have read this, because this is an all or nothing grade. For me, I do 10 points per item on that, or 10 points per module, and the students are going to have 2 possible grades. They're going to have a 10 or a 0. So they either got it all or they didn't. And I know that if you are one of my students and I look at Dynamic Study Module for Chapter 1, first part for you, you didn't get 10 points by not doing these. I actually have my students do these with their book open. And with that, I mean, it's kind of a free point. I mean, they're going to get either all the points or none of them. But what I, as an instructor, am getting out of this deal is an audience of students who is very much well prepared. I actually stand in front of my class, deliver a lecture, and I've got coherent, attentive faces rather than the zombie crowd who has no clue what I'm about to talk about. So for me, it is an ideal pre-lecture. It's open book. It's an all or nothing grade. Generally, my students get a perfect score on these, and that's fine with me. So I have, because of this, a prepared class that's ready to go, and they're coming in and doing great stuff. They really are designed to familiarize students with the material in the textbook. Instructors can modify the questions in there. That's frankly probably a topic for another day and another time, but that for me is an ideal prep to make sure students are ready to go. So any questions on dynamic study modules, how I might use them, and the logic behind putting those as a pre-lecture test?
No, so far so good.
Cool. I will say that I have met instructors who like them as a review. They do serve a purpose there, but in my head, that's not the best use for them. I've got other things that I do once the chapter's done. Now, let's say I'm in the middle of the week. The lecture's going, I've got this chapter running. What am I going to do to make sure my students really understand this stuff? Let's go in and click Create Assignment yet again. And here I'm going to show you my favorite way to get at some of the tougher topics. This midweek stuff I like to reserve to help students understand things that I probably did lecture on, but they're the tougher topics. So as this wakes up here, This always takes forever. It makes me a little bit crazy as long as this particular page begins to load. We're going to create a new assignment and pick things from the item library. So here, I'm going to come in and I'm going to search. Let's do muscle physiology. This is one of my favorite tough topics in A&P. Whenever you're doing this build from the item library, there's generally this 5-step workflow. We are on settings, which is where we put a name on this. Then we'll go to the item library and pick stuff. Then we can organize it, and I'll show you a little bit about that. Outcomes, if an instructor or a campus wants to build their own outcomes, they can. For a lot of our books, especially A&P, they're already tied to nationwide outcomes. For human A&P, that's the HAPS outcomes. And then the last step in here is to set dates. I generally don't do that when I'm building an assignment. I like to drag them on the calendar. So let's kind of dive in here and pick some items from the item library for muscle physiology. And for that, I'm going to need to, of course, go to the right chapter. So that's going to be the muscular system. And this is where the newly designed item library really begins to shine. What I would say to focus on is these featured items, but we have a lot of power in the filters on this because frankly, as you look at this, there's a crap load of stuff here. And how does anybody know what is the best stuff to pick is really the issue, because I'm still scrolling and I'm babbling like crazy. So what I will almost always do, these days this featured item is really, really handy. But in the filters, what I love doing is I love walking through different item types. Reading questions, almost always multiple choice, and they're frankly, generally, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to say it out loud because I'm an instructor too, so I get to. They're a little boring. Test bank, I almost never want to put anything up in the test bank for students to see because I actually use, and many instructors do, use our test bank to create exams, where the real value here is in the first 2 checkbox activities and coaching activities. These are the interactive things that tend to address the tougher topics. So I'm going to say only give me those. One thing that's really valuable for instructors, especially those who do not want to hand grade essays, is click on answer type. Labeling, matching, multiple choices selected. That's cool. Some chapters will have essays. I generally, if I'm building a course especially, try to avoid those because I don't want to impose onto anybody the need for them to have to get in there and hand grade something. Special features, you can come in here and look at this if you want to. If you leave these all unchecked, you're going to kind of get everything. You can also do Bloom's taxonomy sort, and then difficulty. Difficulty is sort of an in-house thing. It's how much struggle have students doing our items had. So I generally kind of leave all this back end stuff undone and focus mostly on picking those first 2 items. Again, activities and coaching activities are going to give you things that are interactive. So here I would come in, and we don't necessarily need to really focus on anatomy and physiology, but I do want to show you that there's some really cool things in here. Building vocabulary is a good one. I do have a warning here. That little I tells me that this is already in another assignment. That's because we're working on one of my toolbox courses or one of my sandbox courses, and it's already got something built that I was showing somebody. Art labeling can be really kind of handy as it walks the students through the figures in their books. But for A&P, you know what, I got us into the wrong chapter here. I wanted to bring us into muscle and muscle tissue. Sorry, I said muscle physiology, and I brought us into the wrong chapter. I just realized why I was seeing some weird stuff here. Again, I've got those first 2 filters checked. They're going to follow me along. Here's that essay that I don't want, and since I don't have that checked, it's not going to do that. Ranking and sorting are fine. I want those. I just don't want any essays. Now, here, this is what I was hoping to see earlier, and I was wondering why I wasn't seeing it. A&P flicks. If you see in any of the life sciences, if you see the flicks thing in the title, microflicks for microbiology, A&P flicks, bioflicks for gen bio, those are kind of Pixar quality videos. I checked one, and I don't know if you caught it or not. When I checked it, it actually went away. I want this cross-bridge cycle. I'm going to check it. So you watch the words, cross-bridge cycle. Keep an eye on those words. Don't let them out of your sight. I'm going to check that. And in just a moment, you're going to see them disappear because I'm using them, so they're no longer in the list. I'll grab that because it's kind of handy. This big picture animation is unique to Marib. It's focusing on large figures. That's a good one, so it will help describe this as well. With the settings the way I've got them, with these activities and coaching activities, what you're going to get is things that are, again, more interactive and has the students manipulating. There'll be some dragging, dropping. There'll be some watching videos and answering questions about it. And now that I've got a few of those selected, oh, I want these IP2s. Those are really cool as well. And now what I'm going to do is come into the third item. I've done picking stuff. I'm going to come into the third item and organize this a bit. This can be really powerful depending on the discipline. This particular topic, for instance, muscle physiology, happens in a very specific order. And an anatomy physiology instructor would absolutely get this. What we'll have is, and I'm going to drag my notes over here just so you get this, and I'll come down here and make us a new little node. If we're doing muscle phys, then what will happen is several things. We have the synapse, or neuromuscular junction. I'll abbreviate that NMJ. Once that's done, you move on to excitation, contraction, coupling. So I'll write ECC here for excitation, contraction, coupling. After that, we have cross-bridge cycle, and it happens literally in that order. So let me take this and rearrange these things just a little bit. Okay, first off, gross anatomy. The muscle system is probably a good idea to have that there. I do not want these art activities because they don't quite fit that scenario. Remember, I was in the wrong chapter for a bit, so we'll take these all and get rid of them. And now I'm kind of getting down to just the muscle physiology that I want. Okay, events at the neuromuscular junction. That's that synapse. That's going to come first, so I'm going to move that up. Then we have excitation, contraction, coupling, and then cross bridge. So this thing on excitation, contraction, coupling can come up there. So now I've got excitation, contraction, coupling a couple of times. And let's uncheck that. That one actually doesn't quite fit, so I'll get rid of it. And now I've kind of come in here in the organization and sculpted my assignment just a little bit. This bonus question probably ought to come last. So I've kind of tailored. I've brought in some things that I know are going to fit this assignment well. I've tweaked it a little bit. I've rearranged it just a little bit. And I can, even if I get really, really creative, I can come over here and with this checkbox, I told you, we do this neuromuscular junction first and then excitation, contraction, coupling. I can even check this checkbox and say they don't even get to do this until they really understand that one. So I'm going to kind of force them to go in the order I want with these checkboxes. So what I just did with these checkboxes, I'm pointing at my screen like a doofus, like you can see my finger, is do this one, and when you're done with that and completed it, then move on to this one, then move on to this one. If you don't like that idea, you can certainly uncheck these, but it's there as an option. In some cases it fits well, and this is one of those. I'm going to hit save and continue. I'm not going to bother with outcomes or dates yet. I'm going to drag that on the calendar. And that'll get us there, but this gets us some of the tougher topics, and these are great, as I said, mid-lecture. These are far too hard an assignment type for students to do before class. They need the lecture in order to get these done, but they very much help the students understand tougher topics once the lecture's done and out of the way. Let's get us back over to course home, and we can start putting some of this stuff on the calendar in a minute, but I do want to build the end of chapter stuff. So we have that bit to do. I want to move my stupid arrangement out of the way so we're not focusing on that. We've got the mid-lecture stuff out of the way. Out of the way. We got the DSMs out of the way. The last thing I would do to really round out a course is get some of these end-of-chapter quizzes just to make sure the students really kind of put the thumb on and say, I really do have this. So what I would do to finish out this course is we're going to do one more on create assignment, and here we're going to reach into some publisher pre-built, because for most of the textbooks these are really going to work pretty well. So no need to reinvent the wheel here. Let's get this awake. Again, we get to wait on our server. This is a great time to look it over at the person that you're helping and kind of see if they have any questions. Now, I'm not going to do create new. I'm not borrowing from one of my previous. We're going to do pre-builts. So here, what I want to do is come into, we have Ameren Ready to Go teaching modules, best of homework for MP2. And what I'm going to do for this one, sometimes they're end of chapter quizzes. I like those. Ammerman has best of homework. So what I'll do is I'll come in here for MP1, and we were on muscle tissue and physiology. I'll pop that in there and hit continue. And now we have kind of a good coverage for that one course. That happens to be chapter 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and let's put these due on the 1st of July. So there's our dynamic study module. Oh, I've got this course ending too early, forgive me. Apparently I'm going to have to drag this into this past Monday. I've got this course ending early apparently. And then we'll come down here to that, at the very bottom we have that, where did it go? Where'd my muscle physiology thing? Muscle physiology, come on, buddy. Oh, there it is. That's what I get for looking. Let's have that due on the next day. So we'll save that one. And the last thing I wanted to do was that homework for chapter 10, which, excuse me, was right there. So I've got kind of a rounded set of assignments for that chapter. Generally, there's going to be more than one dynamic study module. I just pulled one on, but that's going to be pre-lecture, mid-lecture, and after lecture. And that does kind of round out what I would call a pretty nicely designed set of assignments for mastering for a single chapter. Every textbook's going to be a little bit different. This one actually had quizzes in the past. I don't know if you caught it, but there was some quizzes. These were end-of-chapter quizzes. I think those are from the first edition. Homework tends to be more on the order of midweek stuff, so actually this layout is really good. Get back there. I didn't want to get you out of there quite yet. This is actually an ideal layout. We have pre-lecture dynamic study module, midday, some muscle physiology from the item library from those featured items, some homework, and then an end-of-chapter quiz. So, Katie, how does the plan sound? Does this make sense in your head?
Yeah, this all makes sense. I think I have just kind of one question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So oftentimes, like when I'm demoing mastering to an instructor, I'll get to the learning tabs, learning outcomes area, and I kind of have like no idea really how to tell them to work with that.
Okay, let me show you a couple of things here, especially if you're in A&P. What you can point out to the A&P instructors is that anything that you're looking at over in that item library, whether it's Ammerman or Martini or Marab, those are actually all tied to the HAPS, and that's the phrase you want to use because they should understand it. They're tied to the HAPS, Nationwide Learning Outcomes. So that's already been done, and it will help them. And I'll show you in one of my old courses why this matters. So let's kind of dive in here. And I just realized I can't show you because I'm recording this. This is going to be a live recording. Let me see if I can bring this off screen and possibly show you anyway. I'll have to kind of keep us from seeing student names is the issue. So what's going to happen here? Oh, I didn't mean to leave that quite yet. Not only can they search by, in fact, let me show you something here really quickly. Stop it. I think this may do it. Show you some of my own campus's learning outcomes. No, that's not it at all. Tell you what, I'll find it here on this, on the other screen, and I'll bring it over and show you. Some campuses will call them learning outcomes, some will call them learning objectives, some will call them course objectives. For me, in my campus, this is for A&P 1, what my students have to know. So these were based on the MERIB learning outcomes or course objectives. If you look at the chapter headings, you'll see these over in MERIB. And some schools have gone in and picked the ones that they intend to cover. So what they can do if they have this list handy and they're looking at, say for instance, skeletal system, and they know the things they want to cover, they can here, instead of in the item library, looking chapter by chapter and chapter section by chapter section, they can get out of chapter sections and actually focus on learning outcomes. So what they can do is say, okay, here are some learning outcomes. Show me everything that explains excitation, contraction, coupling. And that will let them, here in the item library, focus in on just things that are dealing with that exact topic. So it can help them enormously to tunnel in and find exactly the right questions. So that's one piece that's really handy here. Another piece that's really, really handy, and it's going to be hard for you to show this, but I may possibly be able to give you a sample of this. Let me come back out to my courses. I've got to be careful where I click because I don't want to end up showing something in the video that I can't legitimately show. Let me go to, bring this up briefly and not show any student names. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to do anything else. Here's manage and here's view learning outcomes summary. I'm going to click on view learning outcomes summary and I'll slide this over again and let that load. Because again, we got a big old pile of actual student names here that we don't need to be seeing. Come on, come on, come on. I promise as soon as this report loads, I'll bring it over to show you. What gets loaded here, and I love this part, this is with zero work on the instructor's part other than clicking that link, and the link said View Learning Outcome Summary. It's a huge summary. It takes a while for the system to build it. But what we're going to see here, there it went, I see it building right now, is we're going to see from all of the work done exactly what learning outcomes were addressed and how the students did on these. So the first column is number of items. The second column is the percentage of students who completed them. Then we have average score. I have some things that actually didn't get assigned. That's why we see some empties here. But remember, the first is number of items in the outcome. Second is percent complete, and third is average score. So if we come down here and pick on one of these, major functions of the kidney, 2 items in here, 67% of the students did it, and 72.4% was the average score. I can toggle this open, and I can see what these 2 questions were. I can see more precisely what the scores were. And this is something the instructors get for literally zero work. In the gradebook, they simply click, show me the learning outcome summary. So while you don't, kind of on a moment-to-moment basis, get this sort of feedback as the semester is going on, it's sort of invaluable. And I tell my instructors that I speak with, this is truly like the leave me alone report. At the end of the semester for the administrators. You want to know how well my students did? Here. This is literally every learning outcome we touched and how my students did on every single one of those. And some of these you can see. This one, demonstrating the ability to think critically and employ critical thinking skills, that actually had 88 items that address that. It's massive, and you can actually see each individual question that touched on that, the percentage of students who worked on it, and what their grade was. So it's a little nebulous when you're in that workflow. If you want to know for any of those questions, let's get back out here to the main menu and back out to my courses and back to that one we were playing in. If you want to know kind of what's going on for a single assignment and which learning outcomes that addresses, you can see that. And that's sort of what it's going to tell you sort of on the by the moment basis. But the real payoff for that is at the end whenever you get that massive report for that learning outcomes. And I think I need to work on a video to put together for you guys to show students that feedback afterwards. Let's dive back in and look at all these assignments and pick on any one of these that we had, like Chapter 3, Homework, the Cell, and come back here to that view. Let's go back to Edit, and then we saw the organization. You can rearrange these however you want. But outcomes, This tells you which learning outcomes your questions that you've picked are going to address. So you saw the big end of semester report. This is just showing this particular assignment touches on these learning outcomes. The school themselves actually have the opportunity, if they want to create their own learning outcomes. They can do that right here, but they would then need to go in and pick individual questions and say, yeah, this meets that, or this meets that. That's not going to be done automatically for them, but what is done automatically is most textbooks are already automatically matched to some nationwide learning outcomes. And again, for A&P, that's going to be the HAPS learning outcomes. That was a really long, drawn-out explanation to what I think your question was. Did I touch on it?
Yeah, that was great. Especially that learning outcomes report. I've barely kind of looked into that area of mastering. That was very cool.
Well, the reason you can't easily look into it is what you need in order to really see it well done is a course with students in it that's run for the whole semester. Then you really can see the substance of what you've got there. And if you've just got something with one or two people like yourself and a friend who answered a question here and there, you're going to have a piddly little nonsense report at the end of the semester. But if I've got 100 students who've all done 100 different assignments with, half a dozen to 24 questions per assignment, that report gets huge in a hurry. And it really does show the effectiveness of mastering. So I'm going to see if I can't put together a nice video for you guys showing the end result of a typical semester, because that's a powerful thing to see when you see it in all of its glory. It really does show it. But this outcomes tab here in the Build It shows you which particular learning outcomes that we pre-tied them to are being met by this assignment. So that's what that's showing you. The date's kind of an obvious thing. It's just when do you want to put this on the calendar. Useful?
Yeah, this is great. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, that was a great question. Is there anything else here before we sign off that you're wondering about?
No, I think you kind of touched on everything that I wanted to know. So this was very great.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. You take care and have a great day.
You too, Terry.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.